Bible reading is from 1 Samuel 16, beginning at the start of the chapter. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I've come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I'll show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed here stands before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Lord said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." But Samuel said. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He's tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And Samuel went on to Ramah.
Well, good morning. The start is a bit unusual. You'll get with it really quickly. Let me introduce myself. My name is David, and I'm the youngest son in a very big family. In fact, I have 7 older brothers, all of whom look at me as the runt of the litter. Growing up for me was a bit tough, I've got to say, because my dad, Jesse, tended to look out for me, but thought he could give me some sort of protection from my older brothers by giving me special jobs around the place. Now, by the way, our family lived in a little place called Bethlehem. You may have heard of that. It's about 20 kilometres south of Jerusalem, which is the capital of our country. It's not a very important place economically, but it seems that Yahweh, our God, often chooses what seems to be unimportant to start amazing things. But let me get back to what I was telling you. I'm the youngest of 8 sons. My brothers are all tall, athletic guys. They have no trouble when it comes to being popular. The girls in the town often comment how attractive my brothers are because they're tall and good-looking. Me, I grew up being and David. It was always the Magnificent 7 and David. Look, let's forget about the rest of my childhood. There really isn't much to tell, except that I loved learning about Yahweh, the God of my people. I grew up not just knowing about him, but with a deepening sense that Yahweh wanted to be known as well. In fact, the best days of my early life began when my father sent me off to look after our little flock of sheep out in the hills behind Bethlehem. Some of them were tough days, but some of them were the best days of my life. It was out in the scrub when I was with the sheep that I really came to know Yahweh in a very personal way. The words from the scrolls that I heard every Sabbath came alive in my heart and my life, and I had all the time in the world to get to know this great God. Now, it was during this time that the adventures which were to characterise my whole life began. Let me explain. To be a shepherd in my day meant you had to go and live with the sheep. That's right, go where sheep go, sleep where sheep sleep, and eat, well, you get the picture, don't you? And you actually get pretty attached to these little creatures. You give them names. You get to know their personalities and their quirks. And you suddenly realise that without your guidance and without your protection, these little bundles of wool wouldn't last more than a day or two in the wild. And as I looked after my sheep, I realised that there was a great shepherd who looked after his sheep too. That's right. Yahweh, the God of my people, was indeed a great shepherd. I had plenty of time out there with my sheep, and day after day I found myself thinking these sorts of thoughts. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Yahweh makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the same sorts of still waters that I lead my sheep. When I think of how my brothers treat me sometimes, Yahweh restores my soul. When I'm tempted to get angry with them and think up schemes of revenge, Yahweh leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now, I know real men aren't supposed to sound like poets, but trust me, it gets a bit lonely out there, and conversation with sheep is a bit limited. So I find putting my thoughts into words spoken to Yahweh out loud keeps me going and keeps me sane. You know, the day I realised that the great shepherd loved me and cared for me was a turning point in my life. And that Yahweh could be known as well as known about was just an amazing revelation. You know, it was about that time when yet another extraordinary experience occurred. Now, I didn't know all the details at the time, but I've learned about them since. Let me fill you in so you understand why the experience was so extraordinary. Many years ago, a godly wise man named Samuel had been told by Yahweh to appoint a man called Saul to be the first king over our people. Now, Samuel had done this and he thought Saul was a pretty good choice. Well, Saul was just like my oldest brother. He was tall, strong, popular with everybody. But as the years have gone by, Saul had turned out to be a pretty poor choice after all. He lost the plot as far as remembering that he was actually meant to be Yahweh's king and not Yahweh himself. In fact, it had got so bad that Yahweh had decided to remove Saul from his position and replace him with another king who would do Yahweh's bidding properly. And here's where I came in. One afternoon, I was just rounding up my little flock, and one of my father's servants, who Dad often used to send to give me a bit of a break from time to time, came running up the hillside and said that I had to get back home quickly. It appeared that Dad had been introducing his sons to a visitor, this Samuel that we were talking about a few minutes ago, who'd come for a visit. And that for some reason that I couldn't understand, Samuel wanted to meet me. Oh, I couldn't understand any of this for 1 minute as I hurried down the hillside. Surely if Samuel wanted someone for some role, my eldest brother Eliab would be the obvious choice. 185 centimetres tall, strong as a bull, and he was pretty smart too. In fact, I think I'd choose him at a single glance. But when I arrived, the most astonishing series of events had occurred. I learned later that Samuel was actually there to choose a replacement king in place of Saul, and that, like me, he had thought to look no further than Eliab. But Samuel listened to Yahweh. Yahweh said, "Don't look at his appearance or how tall he is, for I have rejected him. It's not what man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but Yahweh, he looks at the heart." And Samuel had heard that message about each of my 7 brothers. But when he looked at me, tears welled up in his eyes. He seemed to be remembering something from the past and looking into the future at the same time. But it was what he did next that really astonished me. He picked up a small ram's horn filled with oil and poured it over my head. Now, I know you don't understand very much about my culture, our culture. You may not recognise the significance of that action, but it was to signify that I had been chosen for a special task. I'd actually been anointed. I'd been set apart. And not because of anything I had done or been, but on the say-so of Yahweh through his servant Samuel. Now, I must confess, I could see the funny side of all of this. Here I am, the runt of the litter, as my brothers constantly reminded me, standing in front of Samuel, smelling like the sheep that I look after, not having had the opportunity for a shave and a bathe for a few days, and if you'll pardon the pun, I'm still in my daggy shepherd's gear. My dad and brothers, they'd all had a chance to get washed and dressed properly, and yet it was me that Samuel said Yahweh had chosen. Later on, I made up some of my infamous poetry about that afternoon, and I believe you have it actually written in your book of Psalms, those poems that got written to music. And it's in Psalm 78 and verse 70. Yahweh also chose David, his servant, from among the sheepfolds. From following the ewes that had young, Yahweh brought him to shepherd Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. But you know, I realised that in Samuel's actions there was a much deeper truth. Yahweh was calling me to an enormous task. But as I was to learn, Yahweh never calls without equipping for that call. At the very moment that Saul anointed me, something incredible happened. I felt the Spirit of Yahweh himself rush upon me. You know, I learned later that at the same time, Yahweh withdrew his Spirit from King Saul. I can't imagine the unnerving experience, having once known the Spirit of God, to have that Spirit of God removed from me. But more of that later. I returned to my little flock and my adventures continued. No sooner had I got back into my normal routine when another couple of life-changing events occurred. As the sun was setting one afternoon, I was just herding the sheep back into the pen for the night when a lion snuck into the enclosure and grabbed one of the lambs and started to take off with it. Now, I guess I really didn't think through the consequences of what I was about to do, but having made sure the rest of the flock was secure, I took off after the lion, grabbed it, got the lamb out of its mouth and looked at the lion. And the lion looked at me, and it realised that the lamb wasn't going to be dinner. He thought I was going to be dinner. As I look back, I see that it was the hand of Yahweh who delivered me from that danger and actually allowed me to overpower and kill the lion. A little while later, a hungry bear came lumbering into our flock and grabbed another one of the lambs. I didn't even stop to think this time. I was the shepherd. I had to be prepared to lay down my life for my sheep. Looking back now, again I saw the protecting hand of Yahweh as I grabbed the beard of the bear, freed the lamb, and proceeded to do to the bear what it thought it was going to do to me. I tell you what, after each of those events, I slept well that night. I never dreamt what I would be able to tackle situations like that. Look, I'll skip over the next bit fairly quickly. You'll recall that I told you that Yahweh's spirit had deserted Saul, and that left him an emotional wreck. Someone told him that I could play the lyre and had written the odd song. And I don't know how this happened, but somehow my lion and bear stories had also reached the palace. And so when I got there and was introduced to Saul, I was described as a mighty warrior as well as a singer. Can you imagine a more bizarre combination? A mighty warrior and a singer. Anyway, to soothe Saul's increasingly uncontrollable mood swings, I was invited to spend some time in the palace playing and singing to try and bring some peace to the king's troubled soul. Well, after I'd been there a while and I'd done what I could do, I returned home to the sheep and got back to what I had been really called to do, and that was to be a good shepherd. It was around about this time that hostilities broke out between our people and those pesky Philistines who lived not too far away. The Philistines had set up camp only 20 kilometres west of Bethlehem on the far side of a very deep valley. And even I came to hear about a giant of a man who they had as their champion. His name was Goliath, and he was a big fellow. He was over 2.5 metres tall. That's tall. He had armour weighing over 50 kilograms and a spear with a 12-kilogram head on it. He was a giant in every way. And our King Saul was so overawed by this situation that he conscripted a whole heap of soldiers, including my 7 brothers, into an army who had set up camp on the other side of the valley to the Philistines. Every morning and every afternoon for over a month, the giant came out and taunted our soldiers. It was psychological warfare at its very best. The challenge was on for one of our guys to take Goliath on in single combat, and winner takes all. Day after day after day, this pagan giant taunted our troops, but worse still, defied Yahweh. It was towards the end of this period that my dad loaded me up with a food parcel and some provisions and sent me off to my brothers who were involved in this situation. I trudged the 20 kilometres, and as I did, little did I realise what lay ahead for me. Having arrived in camp, I set about finding my brothers to deliver their food package. All through the camp, all I heard about was Goliath and his challenge and how he was defying Yahweh. Perhaps it was my recent experiences with lions and bears, but I asked, what's in it for the man that kills this Philistine and gets rid of this ugly blot on Israel's honour? Who does he think he is, this uncircumcised Philistine taunting the armies of Yahweh? In looking back, I think they were probably the first words that I ever really uttered in public. This giant had really got the better of me. All these soldiers were looking at the outside, but it was his heart that was rotten. He dared to make fun of Yahweh, and he needed to be taught that Yahweh is not to be messed with. God's people, those who were supposed to be fighting for his name, they too needed to be reminded that Yahweh is a living God and he is all-powerful. These troops of King Saul, they'd been sucked into thinking that Goliath was unbeatable. To Yahweh, the giant was just an uncircumcised pagan. But I was there to give my brothers their food, and so off I went to find them. And when I finally did locate them, I got just the kind of welcome I had come to expect. Having heard me talking with the other soldiers, my dear brother Eliab says to me, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business, tending that scrawny flock of sheep of yours? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights, hoping for a ringside seat at the battle. I think it must have been then that I guess something just snapped inside me. All my life I'd put up with this kind of put down from my oldest brother. What is it with you, I said. All I did was ask a question. I dropped the supplies and stormed off. I've almost felt like I'd done round one with a giant, I've got to tell you. Here I was doing what I was told and my brother's making fun of me again. Now, friends, I'm not really sure how the next bit happened. It may have been someone from my days at the palace, but somehow King Saul got word that I was there and I was talking about the need for one of God's people to stand up to Goliath. And I found myself having been summoned into his presence and telling the king that I was prepared to face Goliath in the name of Yahweh. Saul said to me, "You can't go and fight this Philistine. You're too young and inexperienced. He's been at this fighting business since before you were even born." Well, I said to him, "Listen, I've been a shepherd. I've been tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference, I killed it. And I'll do the same to this Philistine who is taunting the troops of Yahweh. God, who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear, will deliver me from this Philistine. It is Yahweh who fights his own battles." Well, Saul looked at me and said, "Go, and may God help you." Now, at this point, a bit of a comedy began. Saul's assistants decided that I needed to be outfitted like a warrior. Me, outfitted like a warrior. I tried moving around with the bronze helmet and the armour and then picking up one of the king's swords. I could hardly move. Not much wonder soldiers got tired wearing this kind of stuff. So I took all of it off and put my own clothes back on. They still had that slight smell of sheep about them. But I took my shepherd's staff, I grabbed 5 smooth rocks from the creek, put them into the pocket of my backpack, and armed only with my sling in my hand, headed off to find and face Goliath. Not only had I had to deal with my brother's put-downs, but I then had to tell the king as gently as I could that a Yahweh warrior did not need to rely on experience or armour, but had to rely on Yahweh himself. And so I headed down the valley with a number of thoughts running through my mind. What am I doing? I am a shepherd. I am the runt of the litter. I am nobody special. And then it must have been the Spirit of God that prompted some other thoughts in my mind. But yet I am. Not because of anything I've done, but I am something special, someone special, because Yahweh has chosen me to be his man. Samuel told me I am going to be king. All the experiences Yahweh allowed me to have so far brought me to this valley where I face something no one else has been prepared to face. I am here today so that Yahweh's honour could be upheld and his people could be saved. The people need a king who is not like Saul, but who leads by example. It's a strange thing, but as I got closer to Goliath, I found myself not afraid at all. It's as though Yahweh himself was approaching this giant of a man, and the giant's height and strength was being stripped away, and all that's left is a little man whose faith is in something which is not real. It's in Yahweh that I trust. It's to Yahweh that I lift up my soul. No one who puts their trust in Yahweh will ever be put to shame. My hope is in Yahweh. Yahweh is my God. Yahweh is our Saviour. My hope is in Yahweh every moment. I looked again at Goliath, who was standing with his shield bearer in front of him, and thought how pathetic this man was. How sad to trust that which cannot be trusted to save and to be boasting about what he thinks he's going to do. He spotted me and the abuse started immediately. He took one look at me and he sounded amazingly like my 7 brothers. Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick? Then he cursed me by his gods. Come on, Goliath said. I'll make roadkill of you for the crows. I'll turn you into a tasty morsel for the jackal. At least he knew how to use sarcasm properly. For a moment, it was as though my eyes shifted from the giant to Yahweh himself. No one whose hope is in Yahweh will ever be put to shame. Yahweh himself surrounds me and defends me. It is to Yahweh that I lift up and lay down my soul. This giant man of a man needed to understand that Yahweh was not to be messed with. You come at me with sword and spear and battle axe, I said. I come at you in the name of Yahweh's armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. This very day, God is going to hand you over to me. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm about to kill you, and then I'm going to cut off your head and serve up your body and the bodies of all your Philistine buddies to the crows and the jackals. The whole earth will know that there's an extraordinary God in Israel. And everyone gathered here will learn that Yahweh doesn't save by means of swords and spears. The battle belongs to Yahweh, and he's handing you to us on a platter. Now, after years of arguing with my brothers, I guess I knew pretty well how to push people's buttons. My words stirred up the giant, and he started towards me. Now, I don't know whether you've thought about this before, but he couldn't move very quickly. The best he could kind of do was waddle in my direction with all of this armour and spears and so on. Well, I ran from where I'd been standing and straight towards the Philistine. I reached into my backpack for a stone, slipped the stone into my trusty sling, and you've probably heard the rest. When I use my sling, I don't miss. I'd had years to practice out in the scrub, and it allowed me to become pretty deadly with my sling. I hit the Philistine fair and square in the middle of his forehead, just below where his helmet fitted. It's terrifying how much damage a 50mm rock travelling at 150 kilometres an hour can do to anything, let alone a human skull. Goliath was no exception. What happened next, I think I saw in slow motion. The Philistine crashing face down into the dirt. And it was about then that I remembered that I didn't actually have a sword with me. That's a bit of a problem. So I thought, well, look, his sword's as good as any. So I walked over to the giant sword and pulled it out from its sheath. It took me both hands because it weighed that much. And I finished the job by cutting off his head. Now, I know that sounds pretty gruesome. But when the Philistines saw that their great champion was dead, they ran for their lives. They had seen that their gods were no gods at all and that their champion was gone. Never ceases to amaze me how people change when they see the truth for the first time in their lives. Suddenly, the men of Israel and Judah were up on their feet shouting. Their experience of Yahweh's greatness had changed them too. Yahweh's goodness and greatness were obvious to Israelite and Philistine alike. Yahweh's men chased the Philistines all the way to the outskirts of Gath and the gates of Ekron. Wounded Philistines were strewn along the Shaaraim road all the way to those two places. And after chasing the Philistines, the Israelites came back and looted their camp. The giants' weapons I placed in my own little tent. Be good for me to have a reminder that Yahweh doesn't need spears and body armour. He is all-powerful and uses ordinary people like me to achieve his goals. That Yahweh is my God. Yahweh is my saviour. My hope needs to be in Yahweh each moment of every day. Now, when Saul saw me go out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of his army, "Tell me about this young man's family." Abner said, "For the life of me, King, I haven't got any idea." The king said, "Well, find out the lineage of this youth." And so as soon as I came back from killing the Philistine, Abner brought me, I still had the Philistine's head in my hand, straight to Saul. And Saul said, "Young man, whose son are you?" "I'm the son of your servant Jesse, the one who lives in Bethlehem." It's been quite a day. Well, thank you for listening to the story of my life so far. Now you know where some of the lyrics for my better-known songs come from. You may have heard the verse which goes, "Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure." And now you know where the "you anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over" comes from. Now you understand how significant the "surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life" comes from. Brothers, kings, lions, bears, giants, who of these can compare to Yahweh? Well, as I said, thank you for listening. There's a lot more to my story, but we're nearly done for this morning. Let me share with you a phrase that perhaps someone else will one day put in the song. It's not about me. The whole account you've heard this morning, it's not about me, you know. I had my part to play, but the story is really all about Yahweh. I had to do my part as the one who was called and equipped by Yahweh. But one day I know that Yahweh will send another, one who is not just a man after Yahweh's own heart, but actually shares Yahweh's heart. One who is one with Yahweh. The best way I can describe it, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Yahweh in any sense, the best way I can describe this person is Son of Yahweh. All my life so far, I have striven to be faithful to Yahweh. One day I will be king. How that will happen, I have no idea, but Yahweh has decreed it. I need to be faithful in the here and now and leave the future to him. But I look forward to seeing Yahweh's Son, for he will be the one whom all the nations will need to bow down before. He is the one whom the nations will need to serve with fear and rejoice with trembling. He is the one whom you need to follow. He is the one who will be your glory and the one who, when you are feeling downcast, will lift up your head. Well, before I head off for whatever's next in my life, I have to ask you, do you know Yahweh? Is Yahweh your king? Have you surrendered to his Son yet? Do you know that your future is absolutely, but only secure in Yahweh's Son? And if you are a follower of Yahweh, don't get distracted. Forget Goliath. Forget all those giants in your life. Forget all those things that tend to overpower and overbear you. Goliath, he trusted in lies and now lies dead. Look after your sheep. Do whatever it is that Yahweh has called you to do. Practice being Yahweh's, the King's person. Live as if each day is your last. Make sure everyone knows it is the King and only the King who really matters. Life is only found in Yahweh, and true rescue is only found in his Son. Love the Son, live for the Son, and your soul will never be put to shame. What about my songs? Well, I've just finished another one. Perhaps if it's pleasing and honouring to Yahweh, one day you might get to hear it. Until then, enjoy this.
Lift up my soul, in you I trust, oh my God. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. Show me your ways and teach me your paths. Guide me in truth, lead me on. For you're my God, you are my Savior. My hope is in you each moment of the day. No one whose hope is in you will ever be put to shame. That's why my eyes are on you, oh Lord. Surround me, defend me, oh how I need you. To you I lift up my soul, to you I lift up my soul. Remember, Lord, your mercy and love that ever flowed from of old. Remember not the sins of my youth or my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me. According to your love, for you are good, oh Lord. No one whose hope is in you will ever be put to shame. That's why my eyes are on you, oh Lord. Surround me, defend me, oh how I need you. To you I lift up my soul, to you I lift up my soul. No one whose hope is in you will ever be put to shame. That's why my eyes are on you, oh Lord. Surround me, defend me, oh how I need you. To you I lift up my soul, to you I lift up my soul. That's why my eyes are on you, oh Lord. Surround me, defend me, oh how I need you. To you I lift up my soul, to you I lift up my soul. To you, oh Lord, I lift up my soul. To you, oh Lord, I lift up my soul, to you.